Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Pennsylvania Wine Society virtual wine tasting. I'm Marty Cook, the moderator, and today we have Kevin Ostrowski, who will be giving us a tour of the world of rosé wines. We will be discussing rosés from a variety of countries, the method in which rosés are made, as well as the various styles of rosé. And a few ground rules before we start. Kevin, if you could advance the slides by one. I just want to let everybody know that please keep your microphones off during the presentation, but use the chat feature liberally. I will try to interject your comments for Kevin along the way. And also, we are recording this event, so attendance signifies approval of that. If you don't want to be recorded, then you can know now that you can leave. I hope you don't. And beyond that, Kevin, if you're ready to start, we're ready to listen.
Very good, Marty. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It is very, very enjoyable to be with you here. Sitting not too far outside of Pittsburgh, I'm looking at a 60-degree kind of cloudy day. I think we're expecting some rain, but regardless, it's a good afternoon to be enjoying some rosé wine today. There's a little bit about me. I'm not going to dwell on this. Let's just say that I've been keeping myself busy post-retirement. I would certainly look forward to hearing from any one of you and certainly answer any questions, as Marty said, at the end of the presentation. I wanted to give you, first of all, just a quick updates before we get on topic. Perhaps you've been following these stories on the news, but France, specifically Burgundy, Bordeaux, the Rhone Valley, Provence, one of the areas we're going to talk about, has been suffering through some rather cold weather. Kind of like we experienced last week. They had a long spell of warmer weather, actually had bud break, and now it's been snowing and frosty in that part of the world. The images you see are the different, I think they call it true gel buckets. They're basically sterno buckets that are burned in the vineyards for warmth. And needless to say, the President Macron has declared that an agricultural disaster in those part of the world. So it's a story to just keep up with and pay attention to, but obviously it's going to be affecting the vintages this year across France in those parts of the world. Another article that came up this past week I wanted to mention was out of this news feed called 750 Daily. Again, I'm not going to discuss it in great detail, but as perhaps we'll discuss throughout the course of the presentation, the popularity of rosé has grown tremendously in the last few years. You can see there that the drinks market analysis has it at 118% sales growth in the last 5 years. Yet most recently in this past year, they've actually seen a decline in the growth rate. So the question that's on the table and the focus of this particular article is, are we seeing a decline because the quality is suffering? And that becomes more of a discussion rather than a question. Regardless of the article, we're going to talk about rosé today. It's one of my favorite wines of all types. It seems like it fits every occasion. If red wine drinkers don't care for it, care for white wine, rosé is a nice compromise. If white wine drinkers don't like red wine, again, it's a nice compromise. Rosé seems to just about go with everything and pleases everybody in general. So we will talk about some of the different styles and types of rosé wines today. Looking around the world with rosé, we all have different names for it, and some of these you'll recognize. Here in the United States and in France, we will certainly call it rosé. In the United States, it was a trademarked term to call a Cabernet rosé, a blush wine. And today, blush wines generally have the same general characteristics. They're generally made out of red grapes. They generally have a little bit of sweetness to them and sometimes a little bit of carbonation. But again, that's all up to the maker and to whether or not they wish to call it a blush wine. In Italy, it will be referred to as a rosato with a T. There is also another rosé made in Italy that we will talk about a little bit later called a Chiaretto. In Germany, they will call a rosé wine a Weissherbst, which literally translated means white autumn. And I guess I can understand why they might call it white autumn, simply because of the colors of autumn, you know, the reds and the yellows and whatnot. With a little bit of imagination, you can see that perhaps in the color of the wines. And in Spain, it will be called a rosado with a D, again, made from many, many different indigenous grapes to Spain. But those are all the different labels and names that you would most likely see for a rosé wine around the world. Of course, our federal government has regulations with regards to pink wine. Part 27 of the Code of Federal Regulations says that grape wine deriving its characteristic color from the presence of the red coloring matter coming from skins, juice, pulp, or grapes may be designated as red wine, pink wine, and I find it interesting, I did not put the accent on the E, so in our federal regulations, it would be called rose wine as opposed to rosé, but that's just the federal government. If we look at the origins of pink wines and rosés, we go back to when wine was spread throughout the Mediterranean by the Phoenicians in the 6th century. They would have transported grapevines all around the Mediterranean coast up to Marseille, which is in the south of France. Again, wine was made pretty much the same way. They would harvest whatever grapes they grew, all put together in a field blend and press them collectively. These wines became a big hit in the Mediterranean, and it wasn't until a couple of hundred, actually 800 years later, that the Romans arrived in Massalia, which is modern day Marseille, when they stumbled across these wines and also fell in love with them as well. Again, the wines were all made the same way. They would field blend the red and white grapes. The grapes were pressed shortly after harvest. I'm sure this might have been a practical reason because if you leave ripe grapes on the vines too long, animals tend to get after them in addition to birds. So you harvest your grapes as soon as you can, press them off, and make your wine. In those days, wine was often diluted for drinking. There's a couple of theories. Of course, everyone believes that they put a little bit of water in their wine simply to dilute the taste. But water being what it is, they really didn't understand the fact that the reason why they were getting sick from drinking with the water was all the bacteria that perhaps lived in the water. And adding it to wine was just another way to stretch your wine volumes. So you didn't get sick if your water was treated with wine. Advance forward now to the Middle Ages, where the claret, which was made in Bordeaux, became very popular. And it became even more popular when Eleanor of Aquitaine married the Duke of Normandy in 1154. Of course, the Duke of Normandy became King Henry II of England, essentially making him the king of all of England and France. He enjoyed the claret wines out of Bordeaux, and much claret is then exported to England and becomes the rage. So needless to say, this light red wine is extremely popular in the English Empire. Advance again to the 19th century into the 1800s, and the area around the southern coast of France, which we today call the French Riviera, was not much more than a fishing area, a place to grow olives and to perhaps make perfume. However, the doctors up in England had recommended to wealthy Englishmen that they could go through what they would call a climotherapy. In today's terms, we might call it snowbirding. They decided that warm weather was good for your health, and what better place to enjoy warm weather than on the southern Mediterranean or southern French coast on the Mediterranean. So this climotherapy became popular at the Côte d'Azur, or the Azure coast of France, right there around, again, Marseille, Nice, might be some other familiar towns you'll recognize. And when the railroad was built in 1864, of course, the availability of travel and getting to the area became a little bit more popular. And then, of course, they planted the casino, the Monaco Casino in Monaco in 1856. So now you had the beach, you had the casino, you had a railroad to get you there. Life was good if you had the money and you could afford it. Many celebrities at the time enjoyed the Côte d'Azur. Folks like Alexander, the Tsar Alexander II of Russia. And you might recognize him from the champagne presentation we did not too long ago. It was Tsar Alexander II that fell in love with Louis Roederer's Cristal, and that Cristal was made specifically for him. Napoleon and Queen Victoria also enjoyed the Côte d'Azur as part of their wintering over, perhaps. So when the celebrities showed up at the Côte d'Azur, again, many people head to the same place because it must be okay by them. Getting into some of the technicalities of how rosé is made, I've listed 4 different methods here, and I guess you can take some variations on that as you go along. But the first and most popular is a direct pressing of the grapes. This is primarily known to be the process in Provence, where the grapes are harvested directly from the vineyards and pressed very gently as soon as possible to produce a wine that the French call a vin gris, literally translated a gray wine. It's a gray wine because there's not been a lot of time for the color in the grape skins to bleed out of into the juice. So the wine becomes very pale red. And again, that's what they ferment to make this rosé wine in a direct press method. The other method would be a very short maceration, where we let the red grapes remain in contact with the juice for a short period of time. And again, the longer you leave them, the more color you get. So as a winemaker, you can pick and choose how dark you want your rosé or your pink wine to be. The next method is called saigner in France. This is where some juice is actually drained from a tank filled with crushed red grapes. This accomplishes 2 things. We drain a little bit of juice off and we make some rosé wine out of that juice. But what remains behind in the tank is a lot of red grapes and not much juice. So you end up with a much richer red wine in the process. So not only do you make rosé, but you make a nice red wine as well. That saigner method we'll run across in a couple different examples as we talk about them, but I have also an image here to show you that illustrates that a little bit better. Lastly, although I'll refer to it as blending, some people may call it the kitchen sink method of making a rosé wine, where you just blend a red wine with a white wine, a little bit of red with a little bit of white. Across the European Union, this is frowned upon. They do not allow that to take place, with one exception. In the Champagne region, in order to make a rosé champagne, they do allow the Champagne vignerons to add as much Pinot Noir, up to 20%, in order to give the wine its blush color. Again, that's usually done at the point of the secondary, right before secondary fermentation, which results in a pink champagne. Spain does a similar thing with the Trepat grape. If you're not familiar with it, there's an image of the Trepat grape there, a dark black skinned grape. But to make pink cava, they will also add some of that Trepat to the secondary fermentation to make a pink cava. And as the ancients did, you can also co-ferment some red and white grapes. You can throw them all in a batch together and end up with a pink wine or as much color as you wish to have in your rosé wine. So those are the different methods we'll talk about throughout the course of our examples. In order to make rosé wine, they have certain goals in mind. First of all, they want a higher acid wine. They want something that's refreshing and easy to drink. So they will pick the grapes when it's cool outside, most likely at night, because naturally that's when the grapes retain most of their acidity. So if you pick at night, you pick when it's cool, the grapes that you have will be higher in acidity, and that goes into your wine. Also, another strategy is to pick slightly underripe grapes. Again, naturally, the acid levels in grapes go down as the grapes get more ripe. So picking slightly underripe grapes means that your grapes will be a little bit more acidic. And again, in this case, it's a desired trait. In order to minimize the color extraction, again, this is a pink wine, we don't want a lot of color. We're going to limit the skin contact and also the oxygen contact with the grapes. The more skin, the more oxygen contact you have, the darker the color of the wine. We're going to limit the amount of grapes that we throw into the basket. Why? Because more grapes are going to crush the grapes at the bottom of the basket and result in more color extraction. So limiting the volume of grapes in the basket helps preserve less color. And lastly, we're going to expedite pressing. We're going to press as soon as we can. Again, simply to minimize the skin contact. So that is the three different methods that the vignerons are going to use to minimize their color extraction. All of the fermentations are generally done in low temperature stainless steel, primarily to retain the aromatics in the wine. And very few, although that seems to be changing, very few of these rosé wines see oak, but there are several, and we'll talk about a couple of examples. But those are some of the philosophies that goes into rosé wine production. Here's an example of a bladder press that's used by most people now, at least at big volumes. This is where the grapes are loaded into the stainless steel hopper, and a nitrogen blanket is applied, which gently presses the grapes, and it does so rather quickly so as to minimize the color extraction out of the skins. I think this is a great illustration of the Saunier method. In this case, a very large tank filled with crushed or destemmed or all of the above red grapes is drained to produce a very light colored juice. That light colored juice goes off to a separate fermenter where it will make a rosé wine. And what's left behind in the big tank is a lot of grape skins, but not as much juice, resulting in a lot more juice to get colored by a lot more skins. So you end up with a much richer red wine in the process. And then here is what's done in the Champagne region. This is where a small amount of either Pinot Noir or Meunier is added to the secondary fermentation. In French, that addition is called the liqueur de tirage, and that's what goes into the bottle prior to laying the bottle down for its secondary fermentation, resulting in a pink wine or a pink champagne. Now, I'm going to take a little side trip here. This is certainly just more of an interest story, even though we talk about red grapes and white grapes, all of which produce a white or a light colored juice. These grapes, the Teinturier grapes, all are very unique in that the pulp of the grape is also colored. In the lower right-hand corner there, you can see the images. I would say what the grapes that we are most familiar with have a dark skin, but a clear pulp in the middle. Teinturier grapes have the dark skin, but also a pink center or pink pulp. The Alicante Bouschet, the Colorino, the Saperavi, and the Chambourcin are all examples of some Teinturier grapes. most of which are used to make some dark red wines, mainly because you get the color out of the pulp and the juice, as well as the skins. So could you make a rosé wine out of these grapes? I'm sure you could, but it might be a little bit darker in color than you'd like because the pulp and the skins are both tinted with those phenolics, that red coloring. Getting into our regions of France to begin with, I'd like to preface this by saying there's rosé made all over the world, and everyone's using pretty much their indigenous grapes. No matter what country we go to, we could highlight a rosé made from something that is a local grape to that particular country. So I thought it would be good to at least highlight those parts of the world that specialize in rosé. These are places that have been making rosé for a long, long time. In some cases, that's all they make. So once you know who has been making the rosés for a long, long time, from there you can branch out and experiment and taste all kinds of rosé wines from all over the world. But these are the highlights. These are the specialty people. The first one that I will guess most of you or some of you do have on your table right now is a AOC wine from Provence. Of course, in France, the AOC is Appellation d'origine contrôlée, or an AOC. It's kind of like our United States AVA system. This is the AOC Provence. Provence got its name when the Romans moved in, and they called it our province, or Provincia Nostra would be the Latin word, and they just carried that over into the name of Provence. Now, although it's not clearly shown on the map, another area of France that specializes in rosé is the Bandol region, and it's listed there at the very bottom of the page, but Bandol is located just slightly to the east of Marseille. So we will talk about both Provence and Bandol as the specialists in making rosé. The photograph of Saint-Tropez is just to let us all know what we're missing come summertime. The first producer that I'm going to highlight is Chateau d'Esclans out of the Provence region. The chateau itself was purchased in 2006 by Sacha Lichine. He acquired the chateau with the sole purpose of creating what he called the Rosé Renaissance. Just by the way, in 2019, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy purchased a majority share of Chateau d'Esclans for an undisclosed price, probably because it was too big to print on the paper. But anyway, Louis Vuitton, LVMH owns over half of that now, with Sacha the remaining 45%. Highlighting the Rosé Renaissance out of Chateau d'Esclans, this is pretty much their portfolio of rosé wines. Before we go through the list, a couple of things to note. Look at all the bottles for a moment. You notice the color on the bottles, even though these are photographs. I think they clearly show you how in Provence, they're using a direct press method. They're not getting a lot of color extraction. The rosé wines are all relatively pale, but again, they're going to retain some very high acidity. They're going to be quite refreshing when they're drunk cold. And again, Chateau d'Esclans has 6 different wines for every price point. Starting at the bottom, the Palm is their lower end wines. To me, it's a delicious wine. It's a nice deck drinker. If you're going to have guests over, it's very affordable, very delicious. You can see the grapes there, Grenache, Syrah, Cinsault, are all approved by the AOC Provence. So that's their low end. Whispering Angel, I would have to say, is my personal favorite, but I'm not alone. The big number 1 is there because this is the number 1 selling rosé in the world. They're producing over 400 cases of this every year, and it's readily available in our state stores, but it is the number 1 selling rosé throughout the world. As we go through the presentation, I've marked some of the other leading sellers that I'll highlight along the way, but Whispering Angel is number one on the list. I can see why. The price point is nice. It's a delicious wine. Notice that they threw in some Vermentino here, some white grape to the blend. And as you might guess, because of its popularity, they work very, very hard at blending this every year so that we consistently get the same product year to year.
And Kevin, you said how many cases?
About 400,000.
Okay.
Correct. Moving up the chain on their price points, the Rock Angel is next with the same grapes that goes into Whispering Angel. But you can also see that they're going to put this on oak, just a little bit of oak. It goes into neutral oak for a little while and spend some time there. So it's going to have a little bit more of the perhaps oaky flavors to it, and a little bit more expensive. Even at that, I've tried both of them. Again, I still prefer the Whispering Angel, but again, taste them for yourself, see what you think. Chateau d'Esclans, I have not found it lately. I've tasted it in the past. Again, 2 grapes, Grenache, Vermentino, a little bit more pricey, a little bit, same thing, spends a little bit of time in oak. Getting into their higher end stuff, the Les Clans, Grenache, Vermentino. Now you can see the trouble that they went to make this rosé. 90% of the juice is the free run. The first juices that drain out of the press without any pressing whatsoever are used to make this wine. So this is pretty high quality juice that's being used to make this particular wine. It's a temperature controlled fermentation. They put it in oak, second year oak, so it has a little bit of that oak tinge to it. But they also practice the stirring of the lees, which in French, bâtonnage is the phrase. They stir the lees twice a week for 10 months, primarily because those yeast cells break down and give the wine a little bit more of a mouthfeel. It's a texture thing. So between the acidity and the texture and the oak, you get a different wine altogether. Again, a lot more time and effort is spent to make this wine, so you can see it gets to be a little bit more expensive. Their top of the line, Garous, Grenache, Syrah, Vermentino, same thing, 90% free run, temperature controlled, same amount of bâtonnage, and you can see the price point, $103. Again, trying the Garous, it's very, very good, but I'll go back to my $24 Whispering Angel and enjoy that on my summer deck anytime I feel like it. If I purchase Garous, I would, first of all, but I'm going to certainly have that on a special occasion. So that's the Chateau d'Esclans portfolio, and that's going to pretty much highlight the different styles of wine coming out of Provence. All of these are going to have similar characteristics. Their color is going to be pale pink or salmon in color. Their aromas and flavors are all similar, with some hints of raspberry, strawberry, cranberry, maybe some red currant. They're all going to be dry, little or no residual sugar, all light body, crisp, tart, high acidity, some mouthfeel, some more than others. I found it interesting that in 1955, the vignerons in Provence actually got together and decided that we needed a class system similar to Burgundy and Bordeaux. And they created this club called the Club des Crus Classés des Côtes de Provence. There's 18 wineries that are current members. For those, if you find a bottle of their wine, you will most likely find that they listed on the label that they are a Cru class wine. So it'll say Cru class or Cru class des Côtes de Provence. But again, it really didn't take off as much as it is in Bordeaux or Burgundy, but yet this club still exists in Provence. So if you find one, it might be interesting. The only brand name that I have seen myself personally is a Chateau Selle, Selle, and they make a brand with a label OTT, OTT is the cover of the label. And I know that they are a Cru Class A that I've seen locally here. I listed, just as a note, by the way, food pairing, bouillabaisse is popular in this part of the world in Provence. This is a seafood stew, a little bit of tomato, a lot of good seafood, but it would go very, very well with a rosé wine and its flavor profile. On the West Coast, they would call this a cioppino, which probably has a little bit more Portuguese influence and Italian, but nonetheless, a good pairing for a rosé wine. I also thought it'd be interesting to share with you a typical or a classic aroma and flavor descriptor that's used for some of these wines, and that French phrase is garrigue. Garrigue refers to the scrub brush or the shrubbery that's found in the limestone around the Mediterranean basin, most of which are alkaline or not very, very light acidic soils. The typical blend of shrubbery includes lavender, thyme, sage, and rosemary, kind of the same blend that we see in Herbe de Provence. So why did Herbe de Provence come about? Well, because they had all this garrigue that could be harvested and added to the food. And again, this is a wine aroma descriptor. If you hear someone say, I'm picking up garrigue on the wine, they're picking up some of this thyme, sage, rosemary, and perhaps lavender in the process. So if you happen to smell your wine and you pick up some garrigue, that's why it is. Moving a little bit to the east, we're going to talk about the AOC Bandol. This is another popular region for rosé wine. Rosé is about 1/3 of the total production of Bandol, although Bandol is also famous for its red wine. But for both red wine and rosé, Mourvèdre needs to be at least 50% of the blend. Mourvèdre has some synonyms. You may also recognize Mourvèdre as Monastrell or Mataro are also synonyms for the Mourvèdre grape. Because of the high blend of Mourvèdre, the wines are generally described as being a little bit more spicy and a little bit more earthy. The one that I have highlighted there is one that's available in our liquor store system. It's the Domaine La Bastide Blanche. At $20, it's the blend, and there you have it, the 70% Mourvèdre, but also the other classic grapes out of that part of the world, Cinsault and Grenache. This particular rosé wine, Bandol, was noted in Alexandre Dumas' Count of Monte Cristo, where the main character, Edmond Dantes, was drinking some Bandol rosé wine, and he described his preference for the wine as bien frais, which in French would mean good fresh, translated to basically chilled. He enjoyed a chilled rosé from Bandol. So this is the AOC Bandol, same part of the world, but again, different grape mix, and because of the Mourvèdre, a little bit different on the flavor profile. Moving into a little bit further north off the coast of Provence, we get into AOC Tavel. Tavel, as you can see by the map, is located across the Rhone River from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Gigondas, and some other notable red wine areas. Tavel is popular because it is only permitted to make 100% rosé wine. Now, the story goes that the King of France at the time, King Philip IV, also known as Philip the Fair, was riding through the area on horseback and was handed a glass of the Tavel wine. Turns out he enjoyed it so much, he finished the wine before he even dismounted, and thus the popularity of Tavel wine grew. Now, for those of you that may recall my champagne presentation or my sparkling wine presentation, Philip later on goes on to marry Joan of Navarre. Joan being the Countess of Champagne, he in turn, Philip, becomes the king of the Champagne region after having married Joan, who was the Countess. Nonetheless, back to Tavel. Tavel is that small reddish territory adjacent to l'Irak. There are 9 approved grapes for the production of Tavel wine, 5 of which are red grapes listed at the top, 6 grapes that are red grapes, 3 of which are white grapes, and the blend of which would make a wine from Tavel. Here is an example of a Tavel wine, and I'll ask you to just take note of the color of the wine in the bottle. Again, even though it's a photograph, I think you can see that is much more colored than those wines from Provence were. This one is 100% Rosé. Of course, that's all they're allowed to make in Tavel. It's a Grenache, Cinsault, Claret, being a white grape, Syrah, and the remaining percentage is just simply other grapes, according to their tech sheet. But you can see why it has a little bit more color in it. This particular wine gets an overnight cold maceration. The grape skins sit with the juice for 12 to 36 hours. It's all done in stainless steel. It's temperature controlled fermentation. There's usually no oak involved, but you can see how much color is extracted out of that particular wine, of course, giving it its characteristic flavors and aromas, being that it has a little bit more of those red phenolics in the wine. The soils in Tavel are shown at the bottom. They have 3 different types of soils that they consider separate and unique, but they're all some blend of limestone, slate, and sand. The first one being the Vestiges, which is looks more like a limestone-based soil. The Olivet, which has got a little bit more sand in it. And the one that we're familiar with from Châteauneuf-du-Pape is the Galette, or the river rocks or the river stones. In Tavel, they call it the Valongue type of soil. But there is a Tavel Rosé, and again, that's all they make in Tavel. If you get a chance to try a Tavel Rosé, I would highly suggest it. It's very popular. It's very delicious. It obviously has a little bit more bite to it because it does a little bit more, has a little bit more tannin in it. This, by the way, was a favorite wine of Ernest Hemingway and King Louis XIV, the Sun King, and they are noted to have mentioned Tavels in their writings. We're going to move over to the Champagne region, but I wanted to kind of, I'll give you some additional information on how Rosé Champagne was made. But the first Rosé Champagne was made in 1864 by the first official champagne house, namely Ruinart. Ruinart would have made the first champagne, and there's documented selling of pink champagne back in 1764. As I mentioned previously, this is where they add a little bit of Pinot Noir or Meunier into the liqueur de tirage for the secondary fermentation and end up with a pink champagne. In our country, in 1976, pink champagne became very popular, mainly because the Eagles put out their album called Hotel California. And you may recall the lyrics, "Mirrors on the ceiling, pink champagne on ice." That was enough to sell a lot more pink champagne based on Hotel California. This is the wine that I happen to be enjoying this afternoon. I am having the, I guess the image is not real clear, but I'm drinking the Moet Rosé Imperial, and it is again a light salmon or a pale pink color. It's mostly Pinot Noir, a little bit of Meunier, Chardonnay, with some reserve wine tossed in. I was just sharing with you since that's what I was drinking. I purchased the smaller bottle, the 375 milliliter bottle, at $12.99 for this afternoon. But it is a very delicious wine, well worth the $57 that's listed. In the Champagne region, originally, as I mentioned in the early history, They used to field blend their red and white grapes. These field blends were making wines that were pale red or at least pink. In the local area around Champagne, they refer to the color of these wines as huile de perdrix, or translated eye of the partridge. The reason why they called it eye of the partridge is because, as you can see perhaps by the photograph, pigeons and partridge were certainly part of their local menu. And when they would slaughter a pigeon or a partridge, the color of the eyes would turn this dark pinkish color, resulting in a pink wine. So the wines themselves were referred to as huile de perdrix, or eye of the partridge. That phrase is still used today. You can still find champagnes. In this case, there's an example of a Jean Vaisselle that makes a champagne called huile de perdrix. Also in our country, out of Sonoma County, Belglos makes what they call an huile de perdrix out of Pinot Noir. Again, that's out of Sonoma, but again, that can be purchased. I've not seen it in our state store system, but it is out there as an huile de perdrix. And today, most of the huile de perdrix wine is made in this specific region of northern Switzerland. Neuchâtel is pretty popular for this pink wine called huile de perdrix. And just if you find, first of all, Switzerland doesn't export much wine, but if you find some, I might be interested to try it as well. The only other thing I wanted to note is that at the time, Champagne was certainly in competition with Burgundy. And to make their wines a little bit darker in color, you see at the picture at the bottom of the page, some of the less reputable vignerons would add elderberry juice to their wine in order to make it a darker color to compete with Burgundy. They weren't really considered to be reputable, that it wasn't really the right thing to do, but if it sold wine, they didn't really care. I just thought it was an interesting story to hear that even then they were out there to make money as opposed to making a quality wine. The Champagne region also makes other rosé wines. In addition to the sparkling Champagne, down in the southern part of the Champagne region, in the Côte de Bar, there is an AOC called Les Rices, which makes 100% rosé out of the Champagne grapes. This is referred to as AOC Rosé des Rices. The example here I showed you comes from our state store system. Alexander Bonnet would make a Rosé des Rices. It's a still wine, 100% rosé, Pinot Noir, made by the Saunier method. By the way, remember, we've been looking at the bottle colors. Can you see how Saunier might affect the color of a wine? You keep red grapes in contact with the juice for a while, a lot of more color extraction occurs. And this Saunier becomes a very dark, dark wine. This Saunier Rosé of Pinot Noir is fermented in stainless steel. Some oak is applied. It becomes a deep garnet or a fuchsia color. The flavors of this particular wine have been described as goût des rices, which simply means taste of rices in French. It's basically meant to describe a freshness, but at the same time, bitterness and rather complex. The bitterness and complex shouldn't be a surprise because, as you know, tannins in red wine tend to taste what people might describe as bitter. So this rosé wine certainly sounds interesting if I can ever find some.
Well, Kevin, I notice for those of you who may be interested in getting that wine, it's a 6-digit code. So that's telling me that it's a special order. So you can order it online and have it delivered, but it's not available in the stores.
Right. Thanks, Marty. Moving to the west and north of France, we're going to go over to the Loire Valley. Most of you are probably familiar with the 4 regions of the Loire: the Pays Nantais, Anjou, Saumur, Touraine, and Upper Loire. Of course, the wines that are popular up in this region include the Cab Franc out of Chinon, the Chenin Blancs, as well as the Sancerres or the Sauv Blancs out of the Upper Loire. But again, there are rosés made in the western provinces of Pays-Nantais and Anjou-Saumur. I've highlighted three here: Rosé d'Anjou or Anjou Rosé, Rosé de Loire, and Cabernet d'Anjou, all of which are made slightly differently out of different grapes. There's just one example that I show you on the page, but you can see the grape blend, and what separates these two primarily is their level of sweetness. The Rosé d'Anjou, again, you see Groliot and Cab Franc and Gamay, red grapes seem to be more dominant, but that wine is always medium sweet. The Rosé de Loire out of Anjou and Touraine is always dry. You still see the Cab Franc, but you also see some Malbec, which locally is referred to as Côte, Gamay, and the same Groliot. The Cabernet d'Anjou is a little bit off dry. There you see Cab Sauvignon and also the Cab Franc grapes. The one that I have shown on the page, the Domaine des Noëls, is a 95% Groliot, 5% Cab. It's a little off dry. They go through a short fermentation, but they do not let the fermentation complete. Therefore, they end up with a little bit lower alcohol and a little bit residual sugar. So stopping the fermentation early results in a lower alcohol, slightly sweet wine. So those are the rosés coming out of the Loire Valley.
Kevin, another example of the Loire is in the system right now is a rosé from Sancerre,
which is interesting. Rosé, Sancerre is also noted for its Pinot Noir. So I will also guess that that's a rosé perhaps of Pinot, if not a blend of the two. That, again, would be interesting to try. Moving to Spain, the province of Navarra is very noted in the world for its rosé wines. Now, this part of the world you recognize because this is the capital city of Navarra is Pamplona, which of course is where the running of the bulls takes place. This year, the running of the bulls will take place from July the 6th through the 14th. So if you're so inclined, find yourself some rosés from Navarra, some rosados, have your own running of the bulls party. If you don't have bulls, like the Geico commercial, you can do the running of the bulldogs and perhaps enjoy some rosé wines in the process. Ernest Hemingway shows up again. He wrote all about this part of the world in his book, The Sun Also Rises, and he talks about the running of the bulls. But the rosé wines out of Navarra, the rosados, are very, very popular. Here's an example of one that's in the system. It's a Vega Sindoa Rosado. It's, again, a classic grape of the Navarra. Oh, but I should have mentioned, by the way, if you want to note where Navarra is located, it's just across the Ebro River from Rioja. So Rioja is on the southern side of the Ebro River, Navarra is on the northern side. Back to the wine, 100% Garnacha, which again is the Spanish for Grenache. 12 hours of cold maceration. If again, you look at the bottle color, you can see that maceration and its impact on the color of the wine. It's also a Saunier, which means it's bled off of the Grenache grapes. So you end up getting even more color concentration in there. Stainless steel fermentation, no malolactic, so as to retain that sharp acidity. The colors are described as vivid orange, raspberry, cherry, hint of spiciness on the wine as a result. That's just an image of the vineyards where this particular wine is located. Vega Sindoa Rosado, a rosé from Navarra in Spain. I'm sure there's other ones out there. I'm just saying that I just picked one to kind of give you an example of what the colors look like, how it's made, so that you can perhaps find one on your own. This is the Basque Country, so getting into a little bit of food pairing. In going up to Spain and the Basque Country, pinchos is the local term there for Spanish tapas. And there's a variety of them that I think would go excellent with a nice rosado from Navarra. In the lower right-hand corner is my personal favorite Spanish pincho or tapas, whatever you want to call it. It's pan con tomate or simply tomato bread. And that tomato bread, although I've had it in the wintertime, come June or July when our garden tomatoes start coming in, I'll start making some of my own fresh pan con tomate to go with my rosé wine. Some other things that you see up in this part of the world is, although the Bota bag is not popular anymore, you might have seen people either on some of the travel shows or otherwise drinking wine from the porron, which is a glass vessel. If you think about it, this is not such a bad idea in today's coronavirus kind of landscape. Everyone can drink out of the porron without actually putting their lips to the bottle. So you can, if you have a good sense of target, you can get some wine in your mouth and then pass the bottle along to your friends. But this is all part of the Basque Country. And again, if you're going to have a rosé party, why not? Have at it. Moving a little bit slightly to the east to Catalonia in Spain, to the northeast corner, right there at the boundary of the Pyrenees between France and Spain, we have cava, which is the sparkling wine out of Spain. This is all traditional method sparkling wine. You can see the blends of the grapes there. Pinot, Garnacha, Monastrell is what they will call it in Spain. In France, we called it Mourvèdre, but there's the blend. The Castillo Rocio will be a traditional method, cold maceration, 9 months on the yeast or on the lees, with the Beautiful, which I've had before. I really enjoy the Beautiful brand. The Beautiful is traditional method, 15 months on the lees. Again, for the price point, these wines are just beautiful, beautiful summer servers. I see Joe is holding one up. That must be what he's pouring this evening. So there you go. Beautiful is a great, great, great Spanish wine. And again, the price points are very well worth it. But that's Catalonia in Spain, traditional grapes made in a sparkling wine method. Moving on into Italy, I've highlighted a couple here. First of all, let's travel to the eastern coast of Italy, to Abruzzo. Abruzzo is popular or famous for its Cerasuolo d'Abruzzo, which technically translated from Italian is cherries of Abruzzo. This particular rosé wine, and the one I've shown there, is made from the Montepulciano grape. A brief maceration, although they don't really say how long it is macerated. Again, I think you can see by the color of the wine, it's spending some time in contact with the skins. But the Cerasuolo d'Abruzzo will be a rosé wine from the Montepulciano grape. And again, a delicious rosé. I've had this one before. Again, it has a little bit more mouthfeel because of a little bit increased on the tannins. But again, a lovely, lovely Montepulciano rosé. Incidentally, this particular producer always likes to tie a little piece of grapevine to his bottle. So that's what you see tied in straw. I can't imagine the labor involved with doing that, but at the same time, it's kind of their landmark. It makes them stand out on the shelves for us to purchase. By the way, for those of you that may recognize the name, there's also a Cerasuolo wine made in Sicily, but that is a dry red wine, but it also carries the same name, Cerasuolo, out of Sicily. Vittoria, I believe, is the province that makes it there. This one is an Abruzzo specialty, a Cerasuolo. Again, delicious wine. The other one comes from Tuscany, and this one is a Vinsanto. Vinsanto, of course, translates to holy wine. And it is believed that this was the wine that would have been made that was used in religious services. So thus the name Vinsanto. By the way, you can also notice that what the Italians call this wine is an Occhio di Pernice, or eye of the partridge in Italian. So that's what they chose to name this particular wine by Bibbiano, 100% Sangiovese. An interesting production method, they'll take the Sangiovese grapes as shown in the photograph, dry them on straw mats until they basically turn into raisins, and then press the juice, which will have very, very high sugars, resulting in a very concentrated sweet sugar wine. So the Vinsanto is a sweet dessert wine. It's sold in the 375 milliliter bottle, if not slightly larger, maybe a half liter. But nonetheless, it's a very sweet dessert wine, eye of the partridge. And there, as a food pairing, what is traditionally done with Vinsanto is to take your biscotti cookie and dunk it in the Vinsanto and enjoy it for dessert. So the biscottis that I have shown there is a cherry almond biscotti, which I think would go great with an Occhio di Pernice Bibbiano Sangiovese Vinsanto. So there's some opportunities there to enjoy some Rosé Sangiovese. The other popular region for Rosé is in the Veneto. This particular part of the world, Bardolino is making a rosé wine called Chiaretto, and in Italian, the word chiaro translates into light or pale. My guess is it's referring to the fact that it is a light or pale red wine, which we call a rosé. This wine is made in the same area around the city of Verona, which of course is popular for Romeo and Juliet. Had to put that in there. The one that I showed there is made by the Zanato family. That's Alberto, Carla, and Nadia Zanato. That's the family that's making the wine. And they are using the classic grapes out of the Veneto, the Corvina, the Rondinella, and in this case, Merlot, all fermented in stainless steel. I also have an image there of Lake Garda, not too far away, and also some Corvina grapes. Again, the Corvina grape is what's also used to make Amarone and Valpolicella. So again, you get an idea as to what to expect out of the flavor profile.
And of
but
course,
that's a Chiaretto di Bardolino.
I just want to interject that Avril's kitty is named Corvina.
There you go. Well, now you can get a rosé wine and enjoy it with the kitty. Interesting development in this past year, May 21st, 2020, the Consortio, which controls the production of Prosecco wine, has now authorized the production of Rosé Prosecco. This particular wine would have just been released January 1st of this year. Italy's Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Forestry permits the use of Pinot Noir to make a Rosé Prosecco with some stipulations. It can only be a very, very dry or an extra dry wine. You can see the sugar levels there, anywhere from 0 to 17 grams per liter, which in my opinion is still kind of sweet, but most of the Prosecco we're going to find is dry. It has to be made using a tank method, which is also called the Charmat method, or the originator was an Italian by the name of Martinati. So by the Martinati method or the Charmat method, it's all made by tank. 60 days secondary fermentation in a pressurized tank. Rosé Prosecco can only be vintage rosé. In other words, all the grapes must come from that particular year. And on the label, you should see the word millesimato somewhere, which simply means vintage. It's not allowed to be released until January 1st following the harvest. And right now it's only a DOC, a Denominazione Origine Controllata. They do not expect it to go to the DOCG or the Garantita stage. It's going to stay DOC. This one I found in our local stores. I've not tried it yet. It's a 2020 Monte Chiara Prosecco Rosé Extra Dry. At that price point, I will certainly be buying a lot more since it will be lovely, lovely come summertime on my deck. But again, this is just brand new, first release this year. Moving over into Portugal, I thought I'd bring back a little nostalgia. After World War II, there was some US and European businessmen that traveled to Portugal with the sole intent of having a wine made that would appeal to the veterans in North America. In other words, they wanted a wine that they knew that the soldiers enjoyed while they were in Europe. So Mateus was born, as well as Lancers, both of which were made in Portugal, both of which were sweet, both of which were pink and inexpensive. As you can see today, the original Mateus is the #9 selling wine, pink wine in the world. It happens to be one of the favorites of Queen Elizabeth, who's been in the news lately. So Mateus, again, is still around. You can get it. There's the current offering in the state store for $7 and just under 80 cents, but it is available. And two popular wines that kind of got our pink wine revolution started here in this country post-World War II, Mateus and Lancers. I'll be hesitant to say that I can remember Mateus and Lancers back in my school days, but that's as far as I'm going to talk about that. Mateus was actually shown up in a couple places. Here is Graham Nash, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. You can see behind Graham Nash's album up on the shelf is a bottle of Mateus. So needless to say, a little bit of free marketing there back in 1973. Just this past month, literally this past month, Mateus started producing a dry rosé. This is now available in our state store system for $11. The Mateus Dry Rosé was just released, 60% the Baga grape. There's a picture of the Baga grape there in case you want to curious to know what it looks like. It's certainly a red, thick-skinned grape, 30% Shiraz, 10% listed as other. They do gently crush the grapes so as not to get a lot of color extraction. But they also do some surly aging, let it sit on the lees, 12% alcohol. 2019 was the first declared vintage, and this one, Mateus, was just recently released. I also thought it was interesting. By the way, there's the region of Portugal where that's coming from. You may recognize that area. That's just at the mouth of the Porto River, where, of course, we will see all the different port wines come from. But they intentionally marketed the bottle shape to mimic that of a World War I Army flask so that everyone would certainly recognize it when they see it on the shelves. So Mateus Dry Rosé, again, I've not tried it yet, but it certainly sounds interesting. And at that price point, well worth the effort.
Kevin, back in the early 70s, before the PLCB carried blush wines, pretty much all the rosés were from Portugal. Names like Lagusta and Pombal and Isabel Rosé. I think we might still carry Isabel, but and of course Mateus and Lancers. And then they sort of disappeared whenever we saw the advent of blush wines from the West Coast.
Right. Again, the reason why they're there is because they actually put Lancers and Mateus made wines, rosé wines, popular in our country. And that's kind of the precursor to what we're about to talk about. In our country, although in 1869, there was a white Zinfandel made, it wasn't until 1972 that Robert Trinchero of Trinchero Wines and the Sutter Home Winery produced a Saunier of Zinfandel, which, by the way, they called Huile de Perdrix, or Eye of the Partridge, white Zinfandel. but he had a problem with this particular wine. He ended up with a stuck fermentation. The yeast gave up on him without completely fermenting the juice. As a result, he had some leftover residual sugar in the wine, and rather large volume of it at that. Rather than try to get the fermentation to complete, Robert just said, we'll bottle it and release it and see what happens. Needless to say, in the 1980s, White Zin took off. It became one of the most popular wines of the 80s. One of the suspected reasons was it was a reminiscent of the taste of Lancers or Mateus. But White Zin became one of the more popular wines in our country. A few years later, Charles Kreck out of the Mill Creek Vineyards of Sonoma County made a Cabernet Rosé, and not knowing exactly what to call it, they kicked around a few ideas and landed on this word blush. Charles trademarked the name, and blush wines were born. In this case, blush wines born out of a Cabernet Rosé, but this becomes the pink wine in, the start of pink wines in our country. Today, Sutter Home White Zin is the #1 White Zin in the United States. In 2018, they had about a third of the White Zin market with 10 million cases a year. And in 1994, Wine Spectator awarded the Trincheros the Distinguished Service Award for having introduced more Americans to wine on the table than anyone in history. You can still go visit their house. You can still go look at the Sutter Home Winery. Needless to say, they've expanded their portfolio. I just put a couple of other pink wines up there, a pink Moscato and a white Merlot, all very cheap. And again, there's differing opinions on this particular wine, but I'll be honest with you, at Christmas time, if I don't have this wine on my table, my mom and my mother-in-law would be disappointed because they look forward to a White Zin around the holidays. It's their special wine. And for that reason, I will always have it in the house. Rosé has become extremely popular. One of the reasons why it's popular is because rosé is easy to make. The winemakers have figured out that if they harvest the grapes in September, October, the rosé wine will be ready come January, February, and they can get it out the door come February, March. At a time when the vineyards are still sleeping and the other wines, the white wines and the red wines are still aging, they can make some money by getting a rosé out to market. Not to mention the fact that rosé wines have become extremely popular worldwide. Today, France dominates the rosé market, making 60% of it. 30% of all the wine in France was rosé. 88% of the wine made in Provence is rosé. The largest producers, France, Spain, Italy, and in the United States. Rosé sales were growing at 40% a year. It was projected to be 3.2 billion market next year, but I think as you saw that article at the beginning of this presentation, it may be tapering off a bit as rosé floods the market. Looking at some of the dynamics, 40% of rosé drinkers were females between the ages of 21 and 34. The two statistics I found interesting was that New York drinks 25% of all imported rosés, with Miami #2 at 15%. I somehow would have thought that would be the other way around, but that's okay. New York enjoys its rosé. And 20% of the rosé drinkers do so in the summertime. Not surprising. It's a light, fresh, fun wine to have on the deck, on a picnic, with your guests. Now, next week on Sunday will be the Oscars. So if you want to have yourself an Oscar party and celebrate rosé, here are some suggestions. Here are some celebrities that are in the wine market producing rosés. Drew Barrymore is making a Carmel Road rosé. She is making that out of Monterey, California. The other three, John Legend, Brad and Angelina, and John Bon Jovi, are all making wines out of Provence. So the grape blends will be those classic grape blends out of Provence. John Legend, the LVE, Chateau Miraval for Brad and Angelina, and Hampton Water, which I think is very, very delicious, is a very popular wine in our house anyway. And as noted on the slide there, Brad and Angelina's Miraval is the #2 selling rosé in the world, with Hampton Water being #6. So not bad wines to have that kind of following. Sarah Jessica Parker making a wine out of Provence in Vivo. Post Malone, also out of France, making a Maison #9. And Kylie Minogue making not only a rosé, but also a Prosecco. Now the rosé is made in France, the Prosecco is made in the Prosecco region, but again, both rosés by Kylie. I've not seen those on the market. I don't even know what the prices are because I can't really find them anywhere. But on the left-hand side in the lower left, Sting and his partner Trudy Styler are making a Beppe Rosato out of Tuscany, which is a Sangiovese rosé. So some celebrity wines.
Laura from New Mexico also comments that she thinks Snoop Dogg may be making a rosé.
Funny you should say that. Thanks for that setup. March 31st, Lady Gaga announced a partnership with Dom Perignon. They are going to have a 3-liter bottle of Dom Rosé Dom that's going to be put out on the market. Lady Gaga is making or is partnering with them to raise money for her charity, which is Born This Way. That's the name of the charity, which is a youth mental health charity. And they are only releasing 110 bottles of this Jeroboam, or 3-liter bottle of Dom Perignon. Now you can buy the Rosé Dom at about $400 a bottle. I don't know what a 3-liter bottle by Lady Gaga would go for, but I will guess that I can't afford it. So if you're looking for a Christmas present, start saving your money. And as was mentioned, Marty, Snoop Dogg, the Dog Father, is releasing a rosé through 19 Crimes called a Cali Rosé. And by his quote, "This is how we rosé." Again, you can see it's available in our system, PLCB system. The price point's not too bad at $15, but Snoop Dogg is making a rosé. Another interesting fun thing to do, if any of you are familiar with the living wine labels, you can get an app on your phone, and if you show a picture of Snoop Dogg on the wine bottle, Snoop will actually talk to you through the app. It's the same as the 19 Crimes app, and it's just Snoop Dogg on his rosé. This is going to sum up the celebrity wines, but I wanted to highlight this one specifically. Again, Francis Ford Coppola, the famous filmmaker of Apocalypse Now and The Godfather. Francis makes the wine that is served at the Oscar banquet after the ceremonies. When his daughter Sophia, who is pictured there, was a little girl, Francis told her that he was one day going to make a sparkling wine for her to drink at her wedding. To this day, we can purchase the Sophia sparkling wine. We can also purchase the still version of that, the Sophia Brut Rosé, or the Sophia Rosé wine itself. But that origin was from Francis Ford Coppola promising his daughter to make her a pink wine for her wedding. Now, the other two I just threw in for a human interest story. This year, Francis also is making the wine for the Oscar banquet, and each of the recipients will be receiving a bottle or two of his special edition wine, the 93 awards edition Sonoma Cab, or the Russian River Chard. And Francis basically has said that his intention in the packaging here is to make the bottles look like the Oscar statue. And he wanted people at home to be able to give these bottles to their relatives and have them make their acceptance speeches for whatever the occasion might be. So if you're looking for it, the bottles are on the market. They're about $80 a piece, but that's special packaging by Francis Ford Coppola, specifically for the Oscars. So much for celebrity wines. Now in my price range, box wines and canned wines are extremely popular these days. You can see the market for canned wine is up to 200 million a year, growing, I'm sure. Box wine is at $1.6 billion, all of which are available in a rosé. These are the current offerings that I found locally, so I thought I'd show them to you. The various flags that are shown is where they're coming from. So Cupcake, Black Box, and Boda Box are all out of California. In the lower left-hand corner, Underwood has both a still and a sparkling from the state of Oregon. The one in the lower right-hand corner, the Crafters Union, is out of California. The one next to the Boda Box is by a vineyard, a winery called Barnard Griffith out of Washington State. And that happens to be a Sangiovese rosé, which is getting very rave reviews, I might add. And the other one that's on the page in the upper right-hand corner is Les Rosé, which has an interesting story. It's out of France, but this wine was released during the period when President Trump imposed all the European tariffs. Well, in order to get around the tariffs, the company that makes Les Rosé imported the wine in tanks, large tanks filled with wine. Because of the volume and the bulk, they did not have to pay the tariffs on that particular wine. They got the wine in Auburndale, Florida, where they canned and bottled it there and then released it as Les Rosé. So that's a French wine bottled in Florida, and fundamentally to get around this whole tariff situation. I might have tried the Black Box Rosé some years ago, but at the same time, all worth a try. If you're going to have a picnic, a party, throw them in the cooler. Obviously, they have their convenience factor. I will say that right now, the Tobacco Tax and Trade Board, the TTB, will not let manufacturers put wine in cans any larger than 375 milliliters. So the most you're going to get in a can is a half a bottle, and that's all you're allowed to put in a can. So canned and bottled wines have their place in time. Mark it on your calendars. Saturday, June 12th, National Rosé Day. Good day for a pink party. And we're getting close to the end here. I thought I'd share with you some food pairings. Now, again, rosé wine pretty much goes with everything. So I thought I would share with you what I like to have on my table with my rosé wine. So these are Kevin's favorites, but they all, in my opinion, pair very, very well with rosé. And if I make you hungry today, good, that's the intention. Going clockwise, starting in the upper left-hand corner, of course, a nice pork roast. It's summertime. I love rosé with weenies and beans. For whatever reason, they go well together for me. We just got done at Easter in our household, so baked ham was popular and rosé was on the table. Right below that, out of Provence, a classic Provence dish, the Niçoise salad. Again, named for the city of Nice. The Niçoise salad has characteristic hard-boiled eggs, some olives, usually some tuna fish, whether that's be canned or grilled. But again, a nice Niçoise salad with a rosé, lovely. Lower right-hand corner, a cheese plate. Brie would be a good choice, or maybe some blue cheese. At the bottom center, a grilled salmon. Salmon on the grill will be many, many times throughout the course of our summer. Goes, in my opinion, great with rosé. Directly above it, on the right, a grilled piece of tuna, which I might put on the Niçoise salad, by the way, or just have it by itself. To the left of the tuna, you have to know my last name, Ostrowski, is quite Polish, so kielbasa shows up on my grill many, many times throughout the course of the summer, and there's nothing better than a kielbasa sandwich with some rosé. Right in the center there is a nice charcuterie platter, all of which are excellent with rosé. And on the far left, this French pizza is called a pizza la dière, which is basically a pizza with caramelized onions, anchovies, and olives. Delicious, delicious French pizza la dière, or a French pizza. And then in the lower left-hand corner, another famous kind of an appetizer snack coming out of Provence. That's an olive tapenade. And classically, the olive tapenade will contain olives and anchovies, capers, and usually herbes de Provence that we talked about earlier. Again, beautiful with some garlic bread or maybe just plain old garlic toast or crackers and some rosé wine. To me, just perfect. A perfect summer appetizer.
Joe Villa sends along the comment that he and his wife are having stir fry. I don't know if he's having that with some sort of chicken or seafood in it, but or just veggies.
Good. Good. Excellent.
You're muted, Joe.
I wanted to highlight this right there on the lower right-hand corner. Every year for the last, I don't know how many years since I discovered it, I will always serve this South African Cabernet Rosé Mulderbosch with Thanksgiving dinner. It's always on my table. It's always the primary wine for Thanksgiving Day. Why? Because to me, Mulderbosch reminds me, the flavors remind me of cranberries. And cranberries, for obvious reasons, go with everything on the Thanksgiving table. So South African Mulderbosch is always on my Thanksgiving table with my turkey and all the fixings. And I just thought I'd put that out there as an additional pairing, but it's special in our house for that reason. The top right, again, whether it's a deck party or just an appetizer party, again, great. This is the season for rosé, and we're going to see a lot of it throughout the course of our summer. If you would like a lot more detailed information, Elizabeth Gabay, Master of Wine, last year or year before in 2019, published a book called Rosé, Understanding the Pink Wine Revolution. It's available on Amazon, I'm sure. And there's a lot more. In fact, some of the information you heard today came from her book. However, there is a nice summer read, perhaps, if you're interested in a lot more detail of rosé wine. That finishes up a study of rosé. I certainly hope you enjoyed the afternoon. Rosé is meant for every occasion. It's meant for this time of year. Have your pinchos party, have your pink party, have your deck party. Grab the cans, the boxes, the bottles. It doesn't really matter. Enjoy some rosé wine. It's delicious. It's refreshing. It's fun. Have a good time with it. Maybe have an Oscar party. Who knows? Marty, that wraps up my presentation for the day.
Is there a bibliography? There it is.
Yes, there it is.
And so there's some reference material. And thank you very much, Kevin. The comments of appreciation are coming in right now. Outstanding. Thank you. Great presentation. A super presentation. Another great presentation. Can't wait to sit on the deck and drink rosé. So
good.
Ma'am.
And if you can flip then to the next slide, and we'll open up the open mic. What I'd like everybody to remember is that this was a presentation by the on behalf of the Pennsylvania Wine Society. Visit our website and
donate.
What's that?
Donate.
Donate and donate. So having said that, if everybody would, I invite everybody to open up their microphones. And Kevin, if you want to take the slide down, and we can all chat.
Feedback. Yes,
Don't do
I thought he said open it.
that. All right.
He did, but.
Okay. So, does anybody have any? Oh God, I'm getting some
Marty,
feedback.
feedback.
I'm getting some feedback from somebody's microphone.
There are two people in the same vicinity. I have that all the time at work when we have Zoom meetings and we're in the office. It's
Oh,
crazy.
you're clear. You're clear, Cindy.
Oh yeah, I'm all alone.
Yeah.
I'm alone, but I know what that's like. There's two
Me and
people.
Sandra.
Yeah, two things on. So
Incidentally, my background right here is this is what we're currently looking at in our front yard. That's our PGM rhodies. That's our rhododendrons that are currently in bloom. So we have a yard full of them and they're just gorgeous. So I thought I'd put them on the screen today.
Nice.
yeah, pretty.
Terrific. Anybody at all would like to?
Hey, thanks, Kevin. This is my first presentation with you. Sue and I were sitting here. We just knocked back a bottle of beautiful cava, setting the ground for a future seminar down the road. Cava
There we
is
go.
coming. So
Yep.
I have had beautiful. I just picked it up by chance, and that's why I tried two different ones that I've not had because I love Whispering Angel. It's one of my favorites. And Rosé is my go-to wine. So, but it's interesting, that beautiful. I was glad to see that there. There were a couple ones that I've tried on experiment and have liked. So it was good to see them there.
yeah, I'm a cheap Joe. So when it comes to like inexpensive, it's hard to hit Provence and inexpensive.
Yeah.
So when we're talking, like the whole Whispering Angel line, I love those wines. It's great, but $100 for a rosé? Sorry.
I didn't pay that.
Well, that, by the way, that was intentional. Sasha, the owner, he intentionally wanted to make a high-end rosé and he succeeded.
Sure.
But
Oh, I get it. I just
at
not for me.
$17, try that Palm. That
Oh, I
wine
want to. I haven't. Yeah.
The
I'd like
Palm
to.
is a nice wine. It's not as refined as a Whispering Angel, but it's still, it's really pretty. It's a nice wine.
Is there a way to get a list of the wines that were, or can we get a copy of your presentation? Because I didn't have a chance to write down some of the ones I'd like to try.
I think I sent to Marty a spreadsheet of all the wines that were going to be mentioned in the presentation.
Perfect.
So Marty, if you could get that out to folks, that should
Sure.
be.
Yeah, if anybody would like that, just get a hold of me at my email address, Marty.
I know where you live.
Marty.
Now, remember, if I want to put an underline on this, most of the regions I highlighted is where rosé is a specialty. Again, you're going to find rosés made all over the world. Cindy, as you just mentioned, the price points are usually pretty decent. Just give some a try. But the ones I mentioned, they are specialists and have been making rosés for a long, long time. Try some Tavel, try some Bandol, put them side by side with a Whispering Angel, do some comparisons, and the profiles, I think you'll be surprised at how different they are.
If I could just say one thing, and this is concerning the rosé thing, it's always been an availability thing in PA. It comes with the wind. You got to kind of be in the right place at the right time for the domain ought, or for the or a certain brand. And sometimes it's not there, but that doesn't mean it won't show up. But it can be frustrating because I'm in the wine world, and I'm out there and I'm trying to search for certain things, and I'll be darned if my timing is just off. When I'm looking for something, they don't have it, but then down the road they will. I don't know. I'll never get into the PA rhythm of,
I did a rosé tasting for the Pennsylvania Wine Society a couple summers ago, and it was the next day after National Wine Day, that I did the presentation. I didn't present it, and I'm sorry, I can't remember. Lynn, who presented for me? Can you help me? Because I'm brain dead.
Eric Miller.
Yeah. And I think we had the domain
Catchford.
for that one. And it was a wonderful, wonderful tasting, but it's hard to find them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so all that means is I have to make regular trips to my local suppliers, my stores, and regularly peruse the shelves, especially like I think on Tuesdays or Wednesdays. I forget which day they start restocking, but that's when you got to catch them when it's going out. Rosés are becoming much more popular. There's a bigger walls of rosé available, so you just got to scan through them and look for them.
I do have to say one thing. You know, I started with the liquor board back in 1984.
Wow.
At that point, we had 3 rosés on the shelf, and all 3 were brown.
Ooh.
And I don't mean Provence, all brickish in color. I mean brown. So there was no wonder why people weren't buying these wines and why then they were closed out. It took a long time for people for rosé just in PA in this market to come back around. And now you can find rosé pretty much from every corner of the earth. Austria, Greece, depending on when you're in the stores, man, there's rosé from everywhere. So it's like feast or famine. So welcome to PA.
Like I said, it's a big market, and then they've realized that it sells. So if it's selling wine, they're making it. California, Oregon, Washington, New York, take your pick. Like you said, Joe, it's being made everywhere. Sure. Grab some, try them. You never know what treasures you find.
You were mentioning rosés turning brown, and I read where the reason why the bulk of the blush wines are made out of Merlot and Zinfandel is because they hold their color longest, and they are, after all, just bulk wines, and that's why they use those 2 grapes predominantly.
Yeah, but these were I'm talking French wines at that time. I think we had a Rosé d'Anjou. I think there was B&G might have had just like a generic Bordeaux. I mean, but these things were because they weren't selling, and people were the buyers in PA were buying like and stocking warehouses full of rosé. You could never get caught up into the current vintage. So it was like a pathetic program. So I was kind of glad to see that go away. And I'm really excited to see what we have here today. Unfortunately, it's like now we have 1,000 choices. So, which is a good thing, but keep it fresh, guys. One of the things I've always been about rosé is I've never been a big fan of, maybe back to my starting days, older rosé. So, enjoy it in its freshness. It's beauty when it's vibrant, and I don't know. Yeah. So, sorry, I'll get off my high horse.
We like you on your high horse.
Anybody else?
Somebody talking.
I hear somebody talking. Well, okay. If nobody has any further comments, we did run over a little bit, and
beef and shrimp.
What's that?
Beef and shrimp stir fry.
There
was a question to that. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, they're making that now. That's where I'm headed.
Surf and turf. All right. So we will do this again in a couple of weeks. Actually, Kevin will be our host once again. What is it that we're doing in 2 weeks, Kevin?
We'll be doing France in 2 parts. Part 1 will be Provence, the Rhone Valley, and Burgundy, which is a rather broad area. We're gonna hit I would say the most notable wines from those regions. And then part 2 will become Bordeaux and the Loire Valley. Again, we're going to look at signature wines from those places.
Are you going to do any of the whites from Bordeaux or from Burgundy?
Oh yeah, we'll definitely mention whites from Bordeaux and Burgundy.
Good.
Again, I always try to find them in our systems first.
Yeah.
And those are the ones I try to highlight. But if I can't, I will at least put one on the screen I'll call it the signature wine of that particular area. There's plenty out there. I shouldn't have any problem at all with France and Bordeaux, Burgundy, any of those.
Lynn Beeson is the one that got me started on those.
Yep.
Ganger.
Hey, Kevin and Marty, when you send out the email for this in 2 weeks, is it possible to add some wine selections on there like you did with I think the Cabernets? That's just kind of helpful I do appreciate kind of, we can go to the store and pick from the 50 that they have, but if you have a few that you can guide us with and just make it optional, that would be great.
Yeah, we could probably do an attachment. If Kevin, if you can send me a list, we'll do that.
I will do that, Marty.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments before we leave? This has been tremendous. So thank you very much, Kevin, and thank all of you for attending. And until
Cheers, everyone.
there you go. And
Cheers.
Until next
Cheers.
month, I'll bid you adieu. And don't forget Wine Wednesday. This coming Wine Wednesday is going to be wines from anywhere in Europe except for France and Italy. Sorry, Joe. So, and actually, somebody was taking me to task an email yesterday because I also mentioned looking at the Caucasus and Israel, and hey, I needed to like sort of push the envelope and let people start to think outside the box. But I recognize those may not necessarily be Europe, but at any rate, find something besides French and Italian wine for a change. And
Some
until
good
then,
Lebanese wine.
there you go. Or even
Is that an
North-
oxymoron?
or even
Oh, I'm
North
sorry.
Africa. How about North Africa? So all right, guys, take care.